Okay, welcome everyone to our Sunday night talks at the United Lodge of Theosophists. Our talk tonight is on the obstacles to the spiritual path or the spiritual life, and should be very interesting. So we'll have a student doing that, and all our talks are basically students that are putting theosophy into their own words on various topics that we study on a weekly basis. Everything from karma to reincarnation to spirituality, matter, evolution, the soul, etc., etc. So we'll start with the Declaration and of the United Lodge of Theosophists. If there's any questions, please go ahead after that, and then we'll have the talk, and then leave any questions to the end of the talk for the speaker. So, United Lodge of Theosophists Declaration. The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of theosophy, without professing professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing and too lofty to leave it the time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of theosophy, and the exemplification and practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore has neither constitution, bylaws, or officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis, and it aims to disseminate this idea among theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization, and it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be the better able to help and teach others. The true theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. Is there any comments or questions on the declaration before we start our talk tonight? Okay, well, we will have a student come up now and do the talk on obstacles on the path. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming out tonight. Basically what I'm going to talk about tonight is things that get in the way on the path, and they all kind of revolve around one thing. And this one thing came up today in two conversations that I had, one just before the meeting and one earlier. And one of those things was the personal concern, or the personality's attachment to things and people and identification. Basically, what are we identifying ourselves with? And the conversation right before the meeting tonight was about our identification with personal items and our attachment to personal items, and how going through those personal items and realizing our attachment to them and then getting rid of them is a freeing experience. But it goes much further than being attached to just material things, doesn't it? What do we identify ourselves with? We identify ourselves with our immediate personality. Some people identify themselves very much with their heredity. People identify themselves with their nation or their gender or their race or their history or their family. And these things become very subtle. And to be somebody who is consciously on this spiritual path kind of takes us away from the rest of the group and the mass of people, and it puts us on a special kind of course that entails a lot of suffering. And that's something else that I'm going to get into tonight, how we react to suffering. And so these attachments that most people have and that people on the path have and that we work through it takes us away. These are all things, and they're manifold things. They're temporal things. They're kind of time-based. They're cyclical things. So they're things that pass, and they're not solid things that are our real self, or at least the real self that those of us on this path are looking to identify ourselves with. So to say that we're trying to identify ourselves with that one thing instead of all of these things that are a product of that one thing. We're identifying ourselves with cause. And I kind of, I narrowed 6 obstacles down. I narrowed it down to about 6 obstacles. One of them is personal concern. One of them is belief in a personal God. One of them is false pity. One of them is security and obedience to rules or authority, whether that be a religious authority or a moral authority, an outside authority. Sentimentality, satisfaction, and routine. And this first one, personal concern, as I said, it's kind of a misidentification of ourselves with outward things. And you could say mental, physical, psychic parts of our lives, the temporal things. And when I say belief in a personal God, I think this is something that's very deeply ingrained in us, even those of us who have kind of grown out of organized religion and trying to raise ourselves above that organized religion, because it is kind of ingrained in our heredity. It's kind of a channel in our mind, or a groove in our mind that's gone over generations and generations, that maybe there's this being, or for some people it actually is just some old guy with a beard in the sky kind of judging and getting in the way of karma, and getting in the way of, it's kind of a false idea of providence or fate, that there's some being up there that is controlling that fate. Now, what theosophy posits is that there is a being or a beingness, but it's not controlling all of this. It's kind of stable, and it is the energy, it evokes the energy that creates manifestation, but it's not judging that manifestation or having any, it's not going to each little manifold thing mechanistically and creating those things, or altering those things, altering time periods and altering cycles and altering the fate of different individuals. That is something that we are responsible for, and the kind of the goal of somebody who gets into theosophy deeply is to align themselves with that original cause and to be in harmony with that, to be our real selves. And so even though we might not believe in that personal God, we still have this kind of itching in our mind that somehow something up there has some kind of control over each little individual thing, or our fate. And really our fate is in the seed of our own creation, just like a flower is in its seed. We know what kind of flower is going to spring from a certain kind of seed. It's imprinted in that. And really our mission is to identify ourselves with that seed, even our own individual seed. Look back at our time as a young child and how we apprehended things, we apprehended the essence of things without questioning it, without dissecting it, without analyzing it, without doubting it. And we just felt the essence of it. We didn't question everything we did. We just did it either instinctively or intuitively. Now this kind of leads into this idea of false pity, and this is another conversation that I had earlier today with a friend of mine. And as we were having this conversation, it dawned on me that there are 3 kinds of compassion. There's the instinctual compassion that animals have, like when when a litter is left motherless, another mother of that species will take care of the little ones in that litter, just instinctually, without thinking about it. This is an instinctual compassion, or animals will help each other out when another one is hurt. And this shows that when we look at something in nature, nature is just like the pure signature of this being. We see that is a reflection of that pure being. So compassion is a real law. This is a real compassion, this instinctual compassion. On the other side, we have an intuitional, you could call it, compassion for other beings, and this is the other kind of genuine compassion, where instead of pitying somebody or feeling sorry for them, we suffer with them, and we identify with their suffering in solidarity with that person, in unity with that person. We get on their level and we're with them. And this is a genuine form of, I don't know if I'd call it healing, but they feel the solidarity with you, and you're not taking away that suffering from that person, but you're identifying with that suffering and kind of telling that person with your essence that I too suffer, that we all suffer, all humans suffer, and your suffering isn't special, and that's a good thing. That it's all just a pool of suffering, and there's a purpose to this suffering, to get above it, to get behind it, to get to that state of solidarity with everybody. And we're all going through this suffering and this kind of burning away of attachments that suffering is. That's another kind of genuine compassion that isn't pity, really. You're not putting yourself above that person or looking paternalistically or maternalistically at that person and saying, oh, poor you, and really kind of separating yourself from them. And that brings up the third form of compassion, which is a really kind of false compassion that we could call false pity, which is what I just described, when people kind of they separate that suffering from all the other different kinds of suffering and look at that person as somebody separate, and in a way you could call it virtue signal by feeling pity for that person. They say, oh, I should be feeling pity for this person so I can fit into this, I can fit in socially, and people will look at me as if I'm some kind of charitable person. It's really a self-serving kind of pity or compassion. Realizing those two things, we realize the intuitional and the instinctive, and that really, those are the two real, as a human, these are the two genuine poles of life, not just in terms of compassion, but in terms of cause and the ultimate effect, which is nature. And everything in between there is kind of this emotional, psychic, astral world that gets all mixed up with these false identifications that we have, these false, these mixtures of emotions that come from our heredity, that come from our environment, that come from what we've been told, the ways we've been told to behave, the rules that we've been given, instead of looking organically at what are our own rules. And that kind of gets into this idea of security and obedience over the burning of experience, is what I wrote down here. And a kind of false modesty, this idea, these very pious people that are outwardly pious, but they're really just following certain rules that they've been given morally, whether it's by the church or whether it's by different people putting themselves out there as moral authorities and telling us this is the correct way to act. Instead of going out there and doing what instinctually feels right to you, and maybe making mistakes, and when you make those mistakes, look at yourself with clear eyes and fearlessly look at yourself in the mirror and say, I really hurt that person, or I acted in this unacceptable way, or I caused suffering through my selfishness, and not vicariously go say a bunch of Hail Marys or whatever, or go and go to confession or something, but look inside of yourself and say to and feel the shame, feel the burning of that shame that burns away that the cause of that mistake, the cause of you being selfish and you hurting others or hurting yourself. And that's really the only way that you're going to change, because if you're just following these outward rules all the time, that burning doesn't occur. That burning of that, putting yourself through the forge of that fire and really realizing what was the cause of that. What is the deep inner cause of my own selfishness, and understanding at the same time that that's all a part of being human. So not beating yourself up, but as in the same way of suffering as saying, like, this is all a pool of suffering, and suffering isn't special to any one person. Say that shame isn't special to any one person. Everybody does selfish things to certain degrees. Of course, the stated goal of theosophy is to burn away that selfishness and get to a state of true altruism, not fake altruism or fake charity that's outward, but really changing ourselves and transforming ourselves, or looking at it as finding your real true self, that natural instinctual compassion that the animals feel for each other without ever questioning that. They're not making a decision about whether to take in that litter and nurse it. It's just done. So you can see this correspondence between that selflessness, that altruistic selflessness that's up here in spirit, and in nature, that instinctual selflessness that we see in the animals. Another obstacle that I came up with is satisfaction, is false satisfactions in life, satisfaction in worldly things, like finding satisfaction in material gains, or things, outward things that we've attained, because really these satisfactions are just they're relief for that suffering. They're ways of relieving that suffering for us, but they're false ways of relieving that suffering. They're kind of like a safety blanket in a way. When we get off of work and we say, I need a drink, it's like, or less than that, saying, I need to go eat a carton of ice cream or something like that. You could really look at that as kind of a safety blanket, that you're not facing that part of you that's fatigued or suffering, and looking at it from a causal aspect and getting above that suffering. But this is how the mass of people react to suffering, is trying to soothe it by outward means. Whereas on the path, it's kind of like we're looking for those. There's a part of us, like our real self, is looking for those tense situations, is looking for that suffering. And it's tough to kind of get yourself in that position and say that to yourself, and be courageous about increasing your suffering or increasing your tension so that you can organically get above it. But if you don't do that, you're always going to be looking outside of yourself, like, I need to be with this certain person, or I need this drug, or I need this, I need a drink, or I need to eat, or even just, I need to escape into television or something like that. And extremely difficult thing to do, because these things get more and more and more subtle as you go through them, these different layers. But this gets into the idea of sentimentality, because we also escape into our own sentiments, into our own emotions, and as I said before, this area between the instinctual and the intuitive, this area of the astral and psychic and emotional and mental, is a place that gets mixed up. It's not a solid place, it's a passing place all the time. You're not going to find any kind of anchor there because these things are always mixing up with each other. Our physical urges create these feelings and emotions that we take as genuine. We mix up lust with love, for instance. And so it's not a place to put our foot down on. It's not a solid ground to put our foot down on. But it's a much subtler way that our mind escapes from suffering, is indulging in even like nostalgia, for instance. As we were having this conversation before about all the old things that we collect from our lives and keep with each other that have all these nostalgic aspects to them. Those are really attachments, and it's very tough to get rid of those things and to get rid of that nostalgia. And especially, people of the generation that's sitting here in this room tonight, it's very difficult not to be nostalgic about some things when we see the state of the world today and the kind of lack of trust and lack of cooperation that was always there, but it was kind of more there when we were kids and stuff. But I find myself escaping into nostalgia, and I have to catch myself and bring myself out of it and be here now. But this is another obstacle, is identifying ourselves with a kind of a time cycle, maybe. And really, I guess what I'm getting at here is rising above all of these different attachments that become subtler, and we get into subtler and subtler layers as we go down this path. Subtler and subtler attachments. And I know people that have came here and used to be, hardcore drug addicts, and as they came here for years, it went away for a while, or like in cycles, it kind of just ended up going away. And I always say that you don't have to be sober to come to theosophical meetings, but if you keep on coming, you're going to get sober. It might take years and years and years, but if you keep following this path and like keeping yourself sort of in that compass of, and they say that in AA too, like just keep coming, right? And eventually, and it's a gradual thing, especially again, if you come from generations of drinkers or generations of people who smoked heavily. Like tobacco seems to be one of the toughest ones, was for me, because my grandparents were just heavy smokers. It's like comfortable for me to be in a smoke-filled room, which is weird. But that's what I'm saying, is that, these obstacles, they seem very, there's these outward obstacles like that, like drug use, and then, you get into things like emotional attachments, like lust, and you kind of can get past that. But as we keep going through, you start to find many more there are aspects of our personality that are astrological, that at the time we were born, there are just aspects, like Saturnian aspects to us, and Mercurian aspects, and Jupiterian aspects, and Martian aspects to our personality, depending on when we were born. And we can't really change that imprint on us, but we can use the positive aspects of that astrological imprint to identify those aspects and be on the positive side of that. Don't be like the warlike Mars, be the enthusiastic Mars. Don't be the conniving Mercurian, be the caring Mercurian. So there are those aspects that are imprinted on us from when we were born, but there's also aspects that are imprinted on us that we can change from environment, from heredity, that are kind of, that we can get above those instead of kind of having to transform those. And getting above those aspects is I think one of the basic things that the Theosophy posits is not being attached to those things, because it gives us a certain amount of comfortability to be attached to those things and be a part of a group, or in even in really subtle ways. But it's not the real us. We're above that. We're above those temporal things. We're above. We don't have to identify ourselves with that. Even with our own gender, we don't. Ultimately, we don't have to identify ourselves with that. And that's really the ultimate. In millions of years, we will evolve past those differences. But going through this experience of being in these manifold differences, of being in all these individual spaces, and looking at that and saying to our, the experience of that is very important, so that we can turn around and say, well, what's behind all of this? There's this whole painting, but what is the canvas underneath this painting that all of this is painted on? What is it brings us to more of a realization of what is the cause here. And finally, the idea of routine, the idea of habit, and this is something that I think has a lot to do with heredity. And as I said, the fact that my grandparents smoked so much, and that that's something that's very difficult for me to stop doing is smoking. It's kind of like those cells that they imprinted were passed on to me, and it kind of created an inertia in me through that heredity, and it creates a kind of routine in your life that you kind of have to. It's very difficult to scrub away, and I think it is. It's good to examine those things and recognize those aspects of your parents and your grandparents in yourself, and kind of take an unflinching look at yourself and say, like, what are the things that I need to change about myself that are just really kind of deeply ingrained in me, through my heredity, because those things are changeable, and that's kind of a macro way of looking the heredity thing, but also just how we've imprinted ourselves in our own lives, over our lives, how we've created our own habits, and how we're attached to those habits, and kind of changing them up every once in a while. I mean, I gotta have that cup of coffee in the morning, or it's like or I'm gonna get a headache, right? And it's kind of like an inertia that we get in, and the more that we can get out of that, even something like, like if you're right-handed, try using your left hand every once in a while. Try being ambidextrous instead of using one hand for something all the time. Like even go to that level where you're just you can get above. It's like getting above and above and above, and looking down and looking down from that space, and then physically being able to change from there, being able to be in control from that bird's eye view, and make those changes instead of being way down here and just being everything is a force of habit and everything is a routine. So those were the things that I came up with about the obstacles that I saw. And I think that, when we first get into Theosophy, it's like, obviously there's stuff like greed and anger and lust and all that kind of stuff, and selfishness, and those are real basic things. But I think the things that I identified tonight are kind of behind those, and maybe in a sense a cause of those really apparent things. So trying to get to the source of these obstacles, I come to the realization that it's really our misidentification with all this, and and not just this outward world, but our psychic and our astral world, and all these things that have been ingrained in us. Getting above all that and kind of scrubbing, being able to scrub all that, and it's a constant job, a constant because it's like pushing away muddy water with a broom or something. It's always coming back, and you got to keep scrubbing, and it's always going to come back around that broom. But it's what we got to do, and making the inertia in the direction of the source and not in the direction of all this crud out here. So yeah, that's my talk for tonight. Is there any questions or comments on that?
Yeah, well, it seems that like so you were talking, and I don't think you used the word, but I kept thinking like a lot of things you're explaining is kind of describing like repetitive types of behavior, repetitive cycles that either we've watched other people do, then we continue to do it, or maybe we create the cycle ourselves. So the repetition thing is it seems to really align itself with your talk, and it reminded me of an old saying that I used to read it. You probably read this in the books before, and it would go really well with your talk too. Was that whole, I don't know where this saying comes from. It could be a Kabbalistic one or something, but it says, "You sow a thought, you reap an action. You sow an action, you reap a character." And then you sow a character, you reap a destiny. So like everything's starting from thought and then repetition of cycles, building up this kind of inertia that you spoke of. And that inertia either running in one or two places. It's either running like, directing you into the manifested world and the world of effects, the world of the everyday world, or using the same kind of alchemy, I guess you could say, or method to do what you spoke about also, is to try to create the inertia to direct oneself to a spiritual life. Like your talk's called the obstacles to the path, right, or on the path. So we don't have those obstacles on the path, then we're on some sort of path in a different direction. So the obstacles are obviously one pathway, or I don't know if that's the right way of explaining it. It seems like it's like, left or right. I don't know if that is true, because the obstacles are all part of it too. But just some ideas, like in the idea of repetition, that little quote. I don't know if you know where that quote's from. I've read it many times in theosophical books. And but it's ever so true. Like all these things that you described, it's just they build themselves up through repetition, and then they become the normal. Then they become I'm a coffee drinker. You know what I mean? I don't see a world without that. Or I react when someone does something. I react in this way here, and I don't know. I can't see myself reacting in any other way because I don't know any other way. This has become normal to me, right? So that's what part of your talk made me think about that. Yeah.
Sure.
I had a question too. You talked about I don't know if I can. Oh, well, yeah, we spoke about the whole. No, I gotta think. I wrote down stuff, but I gotta think about what I actually wrote there. I don't even know how to ask a question around it. So give me a minute.
Okay. Well, what you said before, it kind of brought up to me the whole macro idea of the entire Manvantara and the entire cycle. That as we're coming down into more and more materiality, and there's this kind of one side of the circle of this descent into materiality, and the gods that we make during that time, the beings that we make to represent this during that time, that are kind of like conquering, consuming gods, like Zeus and Jehovah and Baal and these things that, like I must go out and conquer and attain and consume and take over. And then as we kind of start on our ascent back up to source, we have these avatars like Krishna and Buddha and Christ that are saying, like, okay, we're gonna try and get out of this groove, and you need to be nice to your neighbor, and feel a unity with everybody, feel a solidarity, and don't feel above other people, and don't feel separate from other people. But that idea of the inertia, like we're still kind of in that inertia of materiality, and there's a lot of detritus from that, and there's cycles within that whole circle of spirituality and materiality, and spirituality and materiality, and it's kind of like a sifting of all these souls, and getting those of us who are conscious of it right now, it's really our responsibility to impress the environment around us, to impress the very atoms around us and the molecules around us with that idea of singularity, of unity and solidarity between each other, and that idea of solidarity and suffering, because as we make this ascent, it's like what I'm talking about here, like we got to get rid of all these attachments, but it's kind of like pulling a scab off before it's totally healed. It's like you're ripping off parts of yourself, and it hurts, and it hurts to get rid of these attachments. It's like the saying that Jesus says, where that people get really confused by, it's like, you can't come to me unless you hate your mother and father. You can't come to me unless you hate your family. And he's not talking about hate in the sense of hostility towards them. He's talking about non-attachment to them, to your heredity, and getting past that, because they're they're from a previous generation that has more of that inertia into materiality, and they're trying their best too, but they're in another cycle than you are, so even getting past that attachment, and getting past that, the personal love, that's a big one, where you get attached to one person. What does that love really represent? I think I addressed this, in the gender talk that I did, where it was like this personal love is just a representation of a universal divine love, but you're like particularizing it with just this one person and getting fixated on that one person, instead of looking at the cause of it, that this is just a symbol. Your personal love for this one person is just a symbol of the universal love, and you're kind of twisting it, and even degrading it in a sense, to have it all focused on just one person. Like, everybody should be looked at with that compassion, that core compassion that we all have instinctually.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I got very conscious of my coffee drinking while you were talking.
Oh,
and
yeah?
just daily aspects of my life where I have those connections still to this habit that has formed that I don't even pay attention to.
Well, it's
like
big in AA, right?
Yeah.
The coffee drinking is a big one there, right?
It's like ingrained almost. That's like totally unconscious. So that's good that was made aware to me.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking about was the cyclical nature of what you were saying. It's almost like I was visualizing the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, the nervous system cycle of how we get into that. And when we quit those attachments, then we get into that nervous system starts going crazy like that. You might, your body might fight, might be like, oh, now what do I do? Or go into freeze, or just numbing out, or whatever.
That's
from that
interesting.
thing, So I think that this has implications on daily life and the way the world is, and it can change the world by us being aware and conscious. We can actually, when we change our life, it changes our family, it changes everything around us, and then we can actually be change makers in our daily life by just being consciously aware of those cycles, those habits, everything you talked about there.
Yeah.
And how that changes the world indirectly by us changing.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the fight or flight thing, you know, and it's getting above that. What does that mean? You know, like what's the third option there, right? And yeah, I mean, humanity as a collective is in that kind of fight or flight thing, right? And maybe not being so hasty, you know, about or impulsive, you know, and
And when
just
we're aware.
slowing down in ways that we can, you know. I mean, there's instances where it's fight or flight, you know, it's like a physical thing, but at a higher level, you know, where we really have these kind of like corporate predators that are, you know, what are we doing here? How are we going to react to this? You know, and it's a gradual threat, and you know, that's always a question: is like, what's the best way to react to what's going on a kind of higher level of the hurting of humanity? So yeah, that's an interesting.
But then we can respond if we get out of that fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Then we can respond instead of react, and we can consciously respond because now we're awake and aware. And then when we respond, it might be an out of calm, clear connectedness instead of disconnection, like you were talking about how those things disconnect us. They get us foggy, kind of. We're not conscious.
Yep.
And then the calm part where our body's not regulated, so we get co-regulated when we're calm and we're back into consciousness again.
Yeah.
And we pay attention and we get out of those habits and those things points you mentioned. We get away from that, then we get clear, calm, and we come from a whole different energy from that.
Well, all those impulsive reactions and all those attachments, are they not being exploited to the max, right? By, you know, marketing or whatever you want to call it.
Energy drains.
Right. You know, I mean, people profit off of that. That's the state that we're in. You know, it's like this, there's material profit in your fear. There's material profit in your reaction to, you know, they'll create a certain group or something that you can join. And if you're scared, you know, and they'll fight against this thing that you're scared of, but they created it, you know, and it's kind of like funnel you into all these different things that aren't genuine. And yeah, I mean, what we're up against are people that know everything that I'm saying here. They're just as aware of everything that I'm talking about here, but they're on a selfish trip, you know. And so it's there's a whole flip side to this whole thing, right? Like, you can use these attachments against people. You can use this impulsive behavior, this instinctual behavior to control people, right? And so, yeah, we have to be cognizant of that, and it's not something that we should like shy away from learning about, because it's real, and it's kind of like a preliminary, I think, a preliminary understanding of that, of how you're manipulated, is kind of a preliminary understanding to this. Like, understanding all this stuff out here is kind of a way of getting a better understanding eventually of this, because you start to realize, like, how am I going to make a real change here? Because if I don't have a solid footing, it doesn't matter how many protests I go to, it doesn't matter how much I yell and scream and whine about stuff. Like, it's not going to really, you know, I'm not going to have any kind of real effect. And so, you know, I guess what I'm getting at is white magic in a sense, you know, like that's the real meaning of white magic. It's just having that solid footing, and then with you inwardly just trying to impress the world around it, impress the environment around you, and bring it in harmony with that initial cause, you know, with that actual compassion, that compassionate law that's a real part of, that Blavatsky talks about as a law, not some airy-fairy, wishy-washy, like, I'm compassionate to you, and, I pity you, and here's my false charity. It's like, no, this is a real law of nature, of the cause. It is the law, the law of love, like real love, the continuity between the cause and the effect, making that continuity, and being in that harmony. And so I guess what I brought up tonight are things that get in the way of that continuity, things that cause discord in that continuity. And it seems very daunting, and it's impossible to think about every one of these little details all the time and kind of try and catch ourselves all the time, but kind of turning that ship around gradually and keeping that pressure on ourselves and keeping ourselves on that course, just slowly and gradually and at our own speed, but keeping that pressure on. And you're gonna, every day you're gonna be like, I'm not doing enough, or I'm not progressing enough, or whatever. But a couple of years later, you look back and you're like, wow, I'm a lot better person than I was before. I'm definitely not being as selfish as I was before, because I didn't even realize that I was being selfish before. I thought I was, Mr. Give you the shirt off his back, but the whole time I'm doing all these little subtle things that are actually really selfish and are causing suffering for other people, right? So yeah, it's a slow process, I think, but the more gradual it is, the more of a solid footing I think you get, and the more of an anchor you get in it. So you shouldn't be discouraged. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that, because you brought this up so many times, like the word suffering, and it's interesting that, this seems to be the cause of everything that you're kind of explaining, is this kind of a deep-seated unrest within the being, like, which essentially, equates to what we call suffering. Suffering can be many different things, right? But it's like there's some sort of deep unrest, deep suffering within the soul or within the being of the person, and trying to find some sort of relief, some sort of, an escape or a relief, or like a medicine, right? And so maybe you could talk about that, because it seems that we're looking for the medicine. It's going, okay, I got to buy a new car, or a new coffee, or a new house, or I gotta go on this vacation over here, or I gotta do something, but the reason why something's pushing us to do that, and it's coming from deep within us. Like, we don't even know it. Like, it's so subtle. It's just there, right? It's like a kind of an unrest. And it makes me think of, like, you see this in many of the teachings where they call it orphan humanity, right? You've heard Blavatsky speak of that in the Mass. He called humanity orphan humanity, and it's almost like we're disconnected or something from our source, and we're trying to find relief until we can figure out how the heck to get back to that thing that we are. And it's not comfortable, right? But what do we, well, you kind of explain what we're doing with that, but maybe, like, if you could talk more about that suffering, like, what is it? Because it's not just a personal thing, right? It's much more than a personal suffering. It's like something deep within the heart. Like, deep, you don't even know you're doing it. You're just like, oh, I'm doing this, it makes me feel better, but I don't know why I need to feel better. Like, what's wrong with me? Why do I need to feel better? Why do I need to feel like I'm not bored, or I'm filling my time, or I'm filling my space with something? Like, we don't even question it. It's so inherent within us. And that's kind of, that's a not an easy one to address. And it seems like a lot of the Theosophy and, like, the Buddhist teachings, like, they go right into that. Like, even you look at the Buddhist teachings, like the 4 core teachings, and the very first thing he talks about is how, like, life is, everything in life brings you suffering, right? And he talks about this, about how trying to find your way back home type of thing. So maybe you could like
Well, there's
add
a
some
couple of
words to
different
that.
analogies in nature that address this, and it's how we know that this is a real thing. And I think that the butterfly in its cocoon that it has made itself, made that cocoon that it's contained in, and then as it's trying to get out of that cocoon, you know, it's like a spider weaving its own matrix around itself
Yeah.
that we've made through our own karma and our own actions and everything. But as that butterfly is trying to leave that cocoon, you see it struggling and trying to get out of these little openings and everything. And if you went over and you opened that cocoon for it, it would never build those muscles that it needs to be a butterfly, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the struggling out of that cocoon that builds up the strength to be that butterfly. So, that's kind of what I'm saying about the false pity and everything, and the suffering is like you alleviating that suffering or like removing that suffering. You're not doing that person any favors. They've got to struggle themselves and build up those muscles, and so that they can be that spiritual self. They can have that spiritual birth. And this gets into people that aren't even on the path, right? You know, like drug addicts, you know, like it's like they gotta have self-reliance, and, you know, it never works when somebody just, you know, fills them up with medication or something. They just go right back to being drug addicts. It's like they gotta suffer and build up those muscles and get out of it for themselves. And so, you know, just like saying, I'm going to take away your suffering is not really helping that person, but identifying with them and saying, hey, you know, like we're all doing this, you know, like at some level we're all suffering like this. But I think that what you're talking about is really like we spin our own webs around us with our actions and our thoughts, especially, you know. And I mean, controlling our thoughts is so difficult right now. Such a difficult thing to do. Or just not thinking is also totally difficult, you know. I think that's kind of like the preliminary thing, is just to be able to shut down the thought. We weave this web around ourselves, or we make that cocoon, you know, and then we have to get out of it. I mean, it really is like all in nature. If you just go and look at nature and you go and look at how these insects act, it's all different aspects of our own experience, how all these animals interact with each other. It's all been thrown off from human experience and from aspects of the human personality, you know. When I was a kid, we went to the San Diego Zoo, and there was these two trees, and there was a monkey family in each tree, and there was this species of monkey that all they did was swing over to the other tree and steal the other guy's kid, and then they would come over and steal the kid back, and then steal the kid, you know. It's like, this is totally an aspect of, you know, I've seen this my own life, you know. You know, it's just these weird like personality aspects of humans, you know, manifested in the animal world, you know. So go ahead.
That's fun.
I was thinking the word that came to me was extractive, and it's extractiveness around filling a spiritual void. Like all the things you were talking about were kind of like the things we use to fill that void, but they're the wrong things. And to fill that void, it's a spiritual void. So we're using material things to fill a spiritual void, and it sounded like that's what you were.
Well, people do that with politicians all the time, right? Like they either, you know, there's a devil and there's a God, and
But you talked about that cyclical and how it moved, and how we're moving through, humanity's moving, and it's like we're moving through that, we're ascending, I think you said, or something, in evolution. We're moving from material to maybe spiritual, or into a different
So this is like when you're going into the materiality, it's called evolution, and
Yeah.
then when you're coming in that ascent and going back, it's called involution.
Yeah, but there's a void in there. So we're
Yeah.
going, because if we let go of those strings or that stuff that we don't need,
Yeah.
then we get a void. We hit this
Yeah.
void, so there's an
Yeah, yeah.
empty place,
Yeah.
a quiet spot, an uncomfortableness, that
Yeah.
cocooning, and then you go to the butterfly, but we're not the butterfly yet. So
No.
I think humanity, the collective you
Yeah.
talked about, is in that
There's nothing to hold on to.
caterpillar, or the chrysalis, or
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
in
chrysalis,
that goo
yeah.
and that soup, the primordial
yeah.
ooze or whatever.
Yeah,
That's where
that's
we're
right.
sitting
Yeah,
in
yeah,
that
yeah.
as a collective,
Yeah, I know
and
what
we
you're
don't know
talking
what
about.
to do
Yeah.
when we're in the void.
Kind of in a womb. In
But
a
if we
sense.
know that
Yeah.
we're in that,
Yeah.
then we can have some comfort in that, because
Yeah.
we can kind of go, well, okay, it's gonna be messy, it's gonna be
Yeah.
ugly, it's gonna be uncomfortable, and it's gonna be dark and yucky.
Yeah.
But if you have some motive or faith or something underlying that, you expect it. Or you
Yeah.
have some teachers ahead of you that taught us, we're going through this is the Kali Yuga or whatever,
Yeah.
we're gonna transform, and we're in the process, we're just processing this stuff. So then we bring that hope to humanity that, okay, we're supposed to be here, we're right where we're supposed
Yeah.
to be, it looks like awful,
Right.
but we're coming out the other side now, we're ascending, and we're evolving, and we're right where we're supposed to be, and we're gonna be a different thing. When we come out, we don't know what
Yeah.
it is, because we've never been here
People
before.
want to grasp on to,
The-
to these fates or
Yeah.
whatever, they want to grab onto something and be. I always kind of picture it like those astronauts that are up at like a space station and they like go out to fix something, and they're like out there in space, but they have the little tether and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, imagine if that tether comes off and you're just like out there in
But that's what we're
out there in infinite space, and like how would that feel to you? Could you find a place of
Well, I think that's what we're
rest
in.
and comfort in that zone? Like, like
We're in
where's the
that.
fate there? Just way out in deep space, and I try and meditate on that sometimes, and it's kind of a cool feeling because you get beyond your body, right? And you get beyond everything when you think in those terms, and it's like, well, I'm a part of all of this, right? I'm a part of this universe. I'm just this little aspect
But isn't
of
that
this
what we're doing
universe.
when we let go of those addictions and those
Yeah.
attachments and those habits?
Yeah.
We are tethering. We are letting go of that
Yeah.
oxygen that holds us to the
Right.
spaceship. We're just in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
void, and we're floating meaninglessly for a bit until we go, oh, that's what we're supposed to be. Oh, we're
Yeah.
supposed to be able to breathe in space, or we're,
Right.
So I
Breathing in space. Or
think,
picturing yourself
but-
at the bottom of the ocean and being able to breathe, like
yeah,
I'm
but
in the
if
like,
we're
dark
energy
ocean.
beings, maybe we don't need to breathe.
Right.
We might just become
Well, yeah,
energy,
your
and
real
then we
self.
don't need to breathe. We don't need material. We don't need all the body. We don't need the material things. All
Right.
the things you mentioned, we don't need in
Yeah.
that other energy form.
There are people who people called the breatharians that like try
Yeah.
just live on their breath and sunlight or something.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
I think some of them have actually done it, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
you can.
The masters, they would go
Yeah.
into a state of meditation that they didn't breathe. They were like basically dead in
Right.
their body.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe
people
we
do
become
that.
that. Maybe we evolve towards that.
Sure. Yeah. Yep. I think the bit before we had physical bodies, that's what we're doing. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's the talk for
Thank you.
tonight.
That's great.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys. Well, thanks everybody who's watching at home, and we'll have another talk in 2 weeks.
Awesome, man.